Hi, I'm Ross Rosenberg. I'm the author of The Human Magnet Syndrome and the creator of the Codependency Cure, otherwise known as the Self-Love Recovery Treatment Program, and the Hitch Trauma Integration Method. Today, I am delighted to be a part of a podcast and YouTube. For those of you who are following me on both, I post most of my work on both platforms. But today I'm with Karen McMahon, the owner and the lead practitioner of her high conflict divorce coaching services. She is at the top of the top, the cream of the crop. I don't know any coach who has an organization that is more equipped and skilled at helping people struggle through high conflict divorces. But what I appreciate most about Karen is how much fun we have when we get together and talk. I've had probably 4 opportunities to be either on her podcast or she on my YouTube channel. And now with my podcast, she on the podcast. So get ready for a lot of fun, interesting conversation, and some new ideas, thoughts, and ways to cope with high conflict divorces.
Welcome, Ross. It's so good to have you here.
Oh, Karen, I think this is number 4, and I'm trying to remember the first one, and it had to be back in the time when we both were working our butts off trying to get our names out there. And all I know is you have just skyrocketed, and I thought you would. You have special talent, you have personality, you have warmth. So I am so glad to be on your podcast, and I am so glad to have you on my podcast. And so thank you for this opportunity. And I can't wait to find out what we're going to talk about.
Well, right back at you. And I think that each time we've spoken, we work with a similar audience from such different angles. And I so respect what you bring to the table and your approach to the challenges of people who've been with these narcissistic personalities. I would love for us to start the conversation today, Ross, with just laying a foundation, which is what I think you do so beautifully. And so, our listeners, I think for both of us, have been in these high conflict, confusing, chaotic, overwhelming relationships where they've been triggered and they've lost themselves and they've lost their sense of self-confidence and there's so much self-blame and self-condemnation and they've been belittled, and so it's heaping pain upon pain upon pain. And I was in this position when I was married, and I didn't know, and so I didn't understand, and so there was so much self-blame and so much confusion. So let's pour a foundation of what is the dynamic of the personality disorder and the person who is attracted to it. Let's talk about how they end up on the dance floor together.
Okay. Well, this is an 8-hour interview, yeah. Right? I'll start at the beginning. So the way I look at it is I look at it from a big picture, a macro perspective and a micro perspective. The macro perspective is both of these individuals had extremely traumatic childhoods. We call that attachment trauma. And during that childhood, they learned to survive. And the child who's going to become the codependent learned to survive by molding his, or we'll call herself, into what the narcissist wanted her to be, or a way for her to stay out of trouble, or to become the perfect child, the trophy child. And so she, early in her life, resigned the opportunities to become an independent individual. And so that survival mechanism kept her safer in a family. And the sum total of it created what I call a relationship template. And that is the unconscious knowing of what is familiar and what feels safe in a relationship. And someone who comes from the codependent, I've changed the name from codependency to self-love deficit disorder. So I will refer to that in this interview as SLDD, and codependent as self-love deficient, or SLD. So that childhood was the cauldron, that or trauma, that would coalesce into codependency, and the creation of the relationship template is the chemistry. When you meet someone, it just feels right. They get you. And if you meet a narcissist and you don't have to talk a lot, you don't have to show off, which SLDs don't know how to do, and you just listen and hear someone's pain, it feels so natural. And if they're charming, sexual, etc. On the other hand of it, if you are born to the same family and you can't figure it out, maybe you're the disappointing child, you have the wrong color hair, you just were born at the wrong time, or you just have the personality where you naturally say no, like a lot of normal kids. And that child is consigned to a future of grave disappointment, resentment, hatred. The narcissist doesn't get their what I call, they can't fulfill their good parent fantasy, and that child endures trauma that is horrendous. There's abuse, neglect, abandonment. He can't or she can't figure it out. And that child creates, just like the child to become an SLD creates coping mechanisms. Well, that child creates coping mechanisms that coalesce as into a relationship template that becomes a personality disorder. And because the trauma is so terribly worse than the child who's going to become an SLD, it is unconscious. It's disassociated. So when adults meet, the chemistry is the matching of relationship templates. Healthy people, and I'm not going to really go into my human magnet syndrome, but I'll say it's the matching of opposite personalities. Healthy people, opposites match. It feels good, healthy relationship. When a SLD is at a dance, wanting to dance, and the narcissist is at a dance, wanting to dance, and they meet someone who needs them to lead the dance and makes them uncomfortable, unconsciously, no chemistry. But if SLD meets someone who feels right and familiar, they get to listen to a person's problems, who has been beaten up by the world, whose 3 wives are trying to get child support, who it has all these terrible bosses that don't understand them and fire them for no reason. And they get to hold his hand and just feel the pain, and he's so sexy. And then the narcissist goes, oh my God, finally someone who listens to me and understands, who doesn't interrupt. Oh, perfect. Well, that's the chemistry. That's the human magnet syndrome chemistry. So chemistry brings all people together. The matching of relationship templates of what we know is safe and familiar brings narcissists and codependents together. It's the dance. The leader needs a follower. If you're going to do a good dance, I can't dance, but I'm good at metaphors. But and the follower, the leader. So that's about the most concise version of the human magnet syndrome, which is my book, as you well know, explanation for why these two come together and why it feels so well matched. And they stay together because of a dysfunctional match. The difference is the narcissist is a lot happier in the relationship than the SLD or the codependent. But
yeah. And I think that so many of us have had that experience where it's like, I don't remember it being so displeasing in the beginning, right? It's like, how did I fall in love with this person? Because now, 5, 10, 30 years later, I'm miserable, but I was attracted. Why was I so attracted to them? And you're describing this bait and switch that kind of happens, though.
Actually, I didn't use bait and switch. If we were talking about the human magnet syndrome and sociopaths, I would throw that in. But we're going to talk about standard pathological narcissists with narcissistic personality disorder. It's not a bait and switch. The narcissist falls in love. Narcissists. If we don't talk about ASPD, sociopaths, narcissists love people. They are able to love. They have sympathy, empathy, and compassion when people make them feel good, when people allow them to be the center of the attention, when people don't hurt them. And SLDs, of course, codependents love. So this is a love relationship. This is intense. This is a miracle. They both... it's like a half person meets another half person, and together they finally feel whole. They need the relationship to feel whole. And that is just beautiful. That's a miracle. That's why people who SLDs and narcissists, when they meet, when all humans meet and fall in love, they have what we call limerence. That's natural. Just you walking on air, you can't sleep, you can't eat. That's all hardwired into us. But the limerence that the SLD and the narcissist has, I call it limerence on crack. They are delivered away from their misery. Then once the relationship is connected and neither are afraid of being abandoned, and this happens invisibly, then their personalities, mostly the narcissist, starts to come out. And the SLD doesn't go, WTF, I'm out of here, because that's what they're used to. They don't like it. They are afraid of being outside of a relationship and being lonely. So they fall in love. The narcissist shows his or her colors. The SLD is more used to it and feels paradoxically safe because that's what they know. And because they're full of shame, they don't want to risk being alone again.
Right. Yeah. So that familiar feeling is part of what keeps them connected, even though, and I remember in my own marriage, just like at a certain point, like, God, this is so hard. And how did this get so hard? And why can't we talk things through? And why is it not getting, I'm pretty skilled. Why is it not getting better? And just really confused. And I didn't know anything about personality disorders. I just thought my spouse was difficult.
Yeah. And you were right. But what you didn't know and what I didn't know, and I was a therapist, a couple, actually I was a therapist in most all of my significant relationships. But what we didn't know is we were more afraid of being alone or lonely than standing up for ourselves and calling out our pain, our distrust, our suspicion, our agony, and something inside of us.
What is that? What is that about someone who has self-love deficiency disorder? How is their fear of leaving a relationship and being alone different from like the standard or normal individual?
Okay, so let me define normal and healthy.
Yeah.
Normal and healthy has problems. Normal and healthy could need someone like you or me. Actually, not me. Normal and healthy could use therapy and coaching. Okay, we're very specific. Normal and healthy just knows when to reach out for help. Normal and healthy can set boundaries, but normal and healthy is just normal. They're not this perfect people that have no problems. Everything that I created and wrote about comes from not being able to find a therapist that could explain what the heck was going on with me. And I eventually came up with this term called pathological loneliness. SLDs, codependents, experience bone aching pathological loneliness. It's an existential disease. When they are not in a relationship, there is this pain that is, they don't know it, but it's reminiscent of their childhood. It is such deep, hurtful loneliness. It's not the same as regular loneliness. Regular loneliness everyone can suffer from, and that loneliness compels them consciously and unconsciously into a relationship. And SLDD is an addiction, and we could do a whole discussion someday in the future on why SLD, self-love deficit disorder, is an addiction. There's just like any addiction, it starts off with a need to more often than not, to medicate pain. An alcoholic might start drinking because of insecurity, anxiety, more, and that pain is the loneliness and the shame, which they're not completely conscious of. So when an SLD meets a narcissist, they fall in love. It's the perfect match. That's the Prince Charming, the Princess Charming, and that pain goes away, the loneliness goes away, and they feel so alive and in love and euphoric. If you have lived with pain your whole life, I have major depression, which is for those who aren't familiar with it, there's only one diagnosis for depression. It's called major depression. There's no medium depression or minor depression. And when I wasn't on medicine, I had so much pain, depression, and the pain was horrible. But on medicine, it went away. And the day it went away, I felt so happy. I still was in a horrible marriage, but it was the absence of the pain that made me feel so happy. And then, of course, my life caught up to me, and I got regular depression. So the point is, when they find that perfect lover, and I quote that for the people who aren't seeing this on video, air quote it, that pain goes away. And then that person is sexy, interesting, and they have sex really quickly. They are living in such pure pleasure that they haven't ever experienced. And that draws them in. Pathological loneliness is also the withdrawal symptom of the addiction, self-love deficit addiction. So should you leave the relationship, that loneliness will return. And every SLD knows that loneliness. I had goosebumps. Every time I talk about it, I get goosebumps because I remember it. And that draws you into a relationship. And SLDs are not addicted to narcissists, because that makes no sense. Being addicted to a relationship, and the human magnet brings them together.
Right. Yeah, I love the very first time I met you, and you talked, and having read so much and talked about codependence, when you coined it as self-love deficit, I was like, oh my goodness, really at the core of all of us who have codependent tendencies is this willingness to give ourselves up to take care of another so that we feel loved.
Right. And it's interesting because SLDs, I don't think there's so many I'm rewriting my book at the end of our discussion. I'll talk about my new book, which basically updates everything. But they want to love. They enjoy loving. They don't think of it as sacrifice. They feel good about it. It's part of their identity. And so when they get an opportunity to take care of someone in the beginning, it makes them feel really good. And then they get caught into a relationship which there's no mutuality, and there's pain, and that the thought of leaving, and the shame of their own gaslit shame, their own personal shame, and their loneliness, it just defies what I call the natural gravity. I call it relationship gravity. If you're an SLD, that gravity is really strong. It keeps you in a relationship, and it's hard to get out of.
So you talked earlier about coping mechanisms, and when I was going through my divorce in the early days, I joined a 12-step program. My dad was an alcoholic. My spouse had other things that he got involved in. And one of the things that I learned in the 12-step program is that we create these coping mechanisms as children, and the very coping mechanisms that keep us safe, like we intuitively know what to do as kids to stay safe. When we bring those same coping mechanisms into our adult relationships, they don't work out so well. And as you're describing, the codependent who needs that, but who also gives and gives to get it, right? Like, how would you describe the behavior of that doesn't serve them in the self-love deficit disordered person?
Well, let me first have a response to coping mechanisms. There are defense mechanisms that are unconscious, or where we're not aware of, that are like coping mechanisms, but they handle our reality. They handle our understanding of ourselves, our understanding of people, and they protect us, but they're behind the scenes. The coping mechanisms they're in front of the scenes. I guess the opposite. They are what we learn to do to survive. Those coping mechanisms are that you learned as a child are brought forward into a relationship. And those coping mechanisms are to survive the loneliness, the pain, and the shame of being invisible, being hurt, being ignored, being pushed around. So those coping mechanisms actually are brought forward, and those coping mechanisms are the lattice, the internal structure that keeps the SLD, the codependent, in a relationship. They coping with loneliness, coping with bad self-esteem, coping with a difficult narcissist. But if you get healthier, if someone sees you, if someone sees a psychotherapist that understands this stuff, someone sees me, those coping mechanisms become the focus of the therapy, the coaching. Why are you, for example, why do you have to disappear at a party when your husband or your partner becomes front and center? Why do you say sorry all the time? And so the goal of people like us is to bring awareness of the coping mechanism and create cognitive dissonance, create a feeling of, what am I doing? Why am I doing that? Why am I giving up so much? Why do I even have to cope with this? And that can happen sometimes on a person's by someone's people just sometimes hit this moment of truth and understanding, and sometimes it's in therapy. And then we start dismantling the coping mechanisms and realizing that we're missing out in life, we're missing out in self-love. And we have to get rid of them or modify them. And of course, that's when the proverbial stuff hits the fan.
I actually really resonated when you and I spoke in terms of how you discussed this and looked at it. And I've lived it, right? And so that what you just described feels to me like me going from living a life with all these subconscious beliefs and behaviors until I became aware of them. And once I became aware of them, then I could start dismantling them. Like, what is this? And I find that so many people that we work with are filled with self-condemnation rather than self-compassion. And there's an Irish saying, I didn't always know it was Irish, but you didn't lick it off the grass.
You didn't lick it off the grass.
You didn't lick it off the grass. It's like it came from someplace.
I'm not from Ireland. What does that mean? You didn't lick it off the grass? I'm not getting it.
I've been in interviews where people are like, what does that mean? And it means that you didn't just pick it up. You were raised with this. This was something that was developed and designed, and you didn't. I guess a dog licks things off the grass. No, don't ask me. I don't really know. But I like the saying. So you didn't lick it off the grass. This is something that through your childhood was designed into you. And now that you know, and this is the cool thing with most people, certainly who are proactive and coming for support, it's like once you know, you can't unknow. But before we get into that, I recall you saying something that really grabbed me the last time we spoke, and it was about the codependence delusion. Mm-hmm. Can you speak about that a little bit?
I'm still dealing with licking the grass. Yeah. Yes. It's so codependent delusion. I remember that, but it's so easy to blame someone else. And one of the things, and I'm not going to stare into another conversation topic, but it could be one of the things that I do differently is I help compassionately and empathetically help people realize if you're going to solve codependency, you have to realize you brought the problem. You are the co-partner to the problem. You are not. No one is responsible for being abused. There's no excuse for that. You didn't lick it off the grass. You chose that person. You chose to stay with that person. So if we're going to get better, we have to quit watching YouTube videos that are, or what podcasts that just completely are negative about narcissists. And we have to take responsibility. And we can't fix or solve what we can't see. And it sounds blaming, but to someone who's self-love deficient, when they find out that they're also a victim, as was their parents and their grandparents, So I wanted to say that, and part of getting older is I don't have the same short-term memory. I'll go off on one area and I can't get back to the other one. So get me back to the other one. You were asking something.
Yeah, you had described the codependent as living in a delusion. It's almost like until they woke up. And so I think for everyone listening, it's like if you're walking this path, what is that? Describe that living in the delusion piece and the waking up.
That saying, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, which did not come from Mark Twain, did not come from Albert Einstein. It came from a 1988 pamphlet from Narcotics Anonymous. Okay. Melody Beattie pointed that out to me. When she actually pointed out that 3 of my sayings were not attributed to any of those people. And so that was interesting. So the codependent delusion is based upon the sum total of their life experience, that they will find love if they just don't get in the way of the narcissist, give the narcissist what they need, and just love them and take care of them. And if they sacrifice enough, if they just are patient enough, if they just don't call the police enough, they just don't divorce them, they sacrifice their life, they believe they're going to solve this problem and experience love. But the problem is, those dreams, those ambitions can never come to fruition because the person who's tied to those dreams has no capacity to fulfill them. And a delusion is believing in something that is not based upon in reality. So the delusion that I love this person, one day it's going to work out, we're going to return back to that limerence moment. He will change, he'll go to therapy. That is a delusion, because first, their lover has a personality disorder, and by virtue of that mental health disorder, they're not going to change or have insight into the problem. 2 is, they don't know it, but they need to be in this broken relationship. Should they leave this person, they'll have the loneliness, and then they will find the next narcissist, or as my therapist told me, the same person, but with a different face. So it's a form of, those who have children know what magical thinking is. Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, Tooth Fairy. It's a form of adult magical thinking that sustains dysfunctional thinking and behavior and relationships. So that's...
Well, where I see it, and if I could share 1 or 2 situations. So people are coming to us, and oftentimes in the very early stages, and I work with a lot of individuals where they want to mend. So they either are still and they want to mend. They want to mend the marriage. So I, my thing is, do you mend or do you end? Like, which is the right path for you? And connecting delusion to the people who want to mend. I was just speaking to a client, and what was so interesting was their thought was, if my spouse could just acknowledge the verbal abuse or the physical abuse, if they could just acknowledge that that they're part of it, all of these statements that they haven't seen in the, let's say, 20 years of their marriage. But the other thing that was fascinating that was missing was, well, let's say they could do all of that. Like, how are the many ways that you're feeling loved by this person?
Right.
Do you feel adored, acknowledged, seen, heard, respected? And so the part for me where after you said that, and I've been looking for it, is the delusion is like their needs aren't even on the table.
Right.
To the point where this individual stopped in their tracks. They didn't even realize that they weren't considering any of even the most basic and foundational needs. Then you have the individual who is definitely getting divorced. They know nothing can change, and they describe a lifetime of being in an insane, in a chaotic relationship. Right. And they say, I believe that we can have a really smooth and amicable divorce.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like delusion. And it's just a question or two. It's like, okay, how has reconciliation gone? How has communication gone? How has cooperation and collaboration? And of course, none of those things exist. And so in what world, in my deluded world, because in what world do you expect that you are now going to have an amicable divorce? And so from in my world of high conflict divorce, I see that delusion. They know they're like pivoting now. They know that this can't continue, but they're still very deep in delusion.
I have an 11-stage treatment program, and the first stage is just coming and seeking help. The second stage is information. It's just an upload of information, whether it's your information, my information, and part of that information upload is a very relatable discussion about personality disorders and self-love deficit disorder. You can't solve something if you don't know about it. And since what we do is collaborative, we collaborate with our clients, our patients. They shouldn't just believe us because we're experts. We want to teach them. And I teach them about personality disorders in a way that is different from YouTube or reading books. And in that discussion is that they have a broken center in their personality, that they are easily triggered and have narcissistic injuries if anything somehow is said or done that they perceive is a question of their worth. And that shame, if it gets triggered, they are unable to understand. All they know is they have to hurt the person, and that's the narcissistic injury. So in this upload of information, I explain, well, what a narcissistic injury is and how you stay this and that. So if you understand a pathological narcissist, whether they have borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, or antisocial personality disorder, and you understand why they are so fragile and they have to hurt in response to being challenged, then you look at what if you divorce that person. That is the biggest it's public humiliation in the eyes of a narcissist, even if it is abandonment. Now, they don't know that because they have a personality disorder. All they know is that person is horrible and they are going to pay for it. So there is no way, the only way there's an amicable divorce with a narcissist is if the narcissist is lying and cheating and you don't know that they're totally ripping you off. There's something wrong when it's amicable, or they got something on the side. So when I teach that, then we go up to stage 6, which is preparing for the narcissistic storm. Stage 7 is setting the boundaries and saying, I want a divorce. It's so important to prepare a person for the divorce because SLDs, they're deer in headlights. They get sucked back in. So by the time we get to stage 6, we create what is called predictive awareness. If you do A, B always happens. If you don't do this always happens. If you and the more they understand about how their SLDD interacts with the narcissist, and they understand what's going to happen when the stuff hits the fan, and build this library of predictive awareness, that when they do it, there are no surprises. The conflict is all over. I go to, what is the sound of one hand clapping? I stole this from someone. And if you're not a smartass and do this, there's no sound. So the conflict is when two people get drawn into it. Right. Now, you still can be horribly painful and necessary to seek someone with your background. But if you've done what I call the homework or been involved in my program, you know why you have been sucked into it. You know about your delusion. You know about the narcissist's personality disorder. You have prepared for every type of scenario. And then everything that you do is going to always be followed by what I call I call it the of course technique. You're going to go, of course, nothing will surprise you. And that, to me, is the most important element of high conflict breakups, is to not, George Bernard Shaw said, don't wrestle with pigs, you'll get dirty, and besides, the pig likes it, is if you fight back,
right,
you lose. Now, having an attorney fighting, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally hear you. And I think that the saying that you hear so often is, I can't believe he, or I can't believe she. Yeah. And it's like, well, of course you can. You've been married to them for like dozens of years.
Well, denial is just not a river in Egypt, as they said in Saturday Night Live in 1980s. I remember hearing that.
So I think I would love to pivot to a skill that can help, that you and I have different opinions on.
Really?
A little bit, I think.
Okay, for those people who don't know me, that's me going, yay, let's talk about it. I actually love different opinion discussions, only because even if I disagree, I end up learning, because, right. But more often than not, I end up learning and find out what I don't know. So let's bring it on.
Yeah. So, when people join us and begin to learn some basics about what's going on, the first skill that I present to them is the skill of boundaries. And most people who are married in these marriages, they're boundary oblivious. They didn't grow up in a household with boundaries. I certainly didn't. They don't they can't define them. They don't understand the value of them. They certainly wouldn't know how to defend them. And so boundaries becomes this really interesting thing. And what I find is that people think, well, if I set a boundary, and then if I'm setting a boundary with Ross and Ross doesn't listen, I need to say it louder. I need to say it more often. I need to, like, what am I supposed to do? I said it and he's just plowing it down. And so for me, the beauty of helping someone step into their agency is helping them understand, number one, I've done these trainings where there's no sense at all of, well, what is a boundary and how do I do that? And then once I do it, of course, he or she will plow it down because they're boundary oblivious. So how do I uphold it? Which people typically think is changing Ross's behavior, but it's actually changing Karen's behavior. If I want to uphold a boundary, I have to change my behavior. And so I would love to have this conversation with you, because I feel like from my vantage point, this is a baby step skill that allows individuals to start seeing and voicing their needs, not expecting the other person to show up differently, but figuring out, what can I do differently to make sure that this boundary that's important to me is maintained?
And so I'm about to say something paradoxical, and just bear with me. So I say to people, boundaries with narcissists do not work. And then I proceed to teach them about how to set boundaries with narcissists. And it's not a contradiction, is if you understand the reception of the boundary, the experience of the boundary, and how and why the narcissist is going to reject it. Then you have to reconfigure what is a boundary. A boundary is not something that someone is going to understand and agree with a narcissist. A boundary is analogous to a physical block. You can't do this. I won't let you do this. And should you do this, there will be a consequence, which could be walking away, calling the police. That a boundary, so if you understand in the beginning, well, narcissists will fight boundaries, and the only time that they agree to boundaries is if there's something to gain from it or the avoidance of a consequence. They will never follow boundaries because of respect or love. And so it's important for the person who's learning about boundaries is to understand what they are and how and why it works. Because if you have a sociopathic narcissist who understands what you're doing, they will follow the boundaries, but they will do it in a way that ultimately will undermine you. So it starts off with boundaries don't work with narcissists, so you have to use boundaries for yourself. So when you say, stop yelling at me, you're protecting yourself. You're not controlling the behavior. And if you understand that they don't work, then I teach them what I call my 3-strike boundary rule, which essentially in the quick version is in a series of 3 attempts to set a boundary, it all starts with boundaries don't work. So in an attempt, you know that this boundary won't work. You know that at the end, you're going to set the last iteration of the boundary is the announcement of the consequence. Set the boundary once, paraphrase it, second time, summarize it third time. And then you say, I have nothing more to say. The consequence, if you do this, is that, and you walk away and you prepare to deliver the consequence. And without emotion, because they need you to be upset. They need you to be angry. Setting a boundary and screaming, yelling, you might feel empowered. You might, you might learn how to set boundaries by your coach, your therapist, and you might feel empowered. But if you're angry and you're in there and saying, you can't do that, you have actually less control than you think. But when you set a boundary and you use my observe, don't absorb technique, and you can stand back and not get caught into what I call the wrestling ring, wrestle with the pig, and you can predict through predictive awareness exactly how it's going to go, you're going to watch it happen, and you are going to know that you have to apply the consequence. Then I say in another video, here's my contradiction. You can change, pissed off a lot of people, you can change narcissists. And what I meant is, if you use behavioral theory or conditioning in these situations where you don't get caught in the fight and you set the boundary, eventually they're not going to get their reward. Like a child, the cookie, the treat for a dog. And eventually they're going to, every time they try to fight, they're not going to get what they want and they're going to experience a consequence. Well, eventually, because of conditioning, I think they call this, I forgot the name of the term, but they are going to stop doing it because they're not getting the reward, they're getting the consequence. You don't change the narcissist. They don't respect you. It's like a dog who you've given dinner treats his whole life, and doctor says if you keep feeding him human food, you'll kill him. That dog, it's going to be 6 months of breaking that dog's habit. And eventually the dog will stop. He won't know why he stopped. So boundaries work if you have the understanding of what they are and how they work on narcissists, and you have the right idea of what is success. And if you understand, if you keep it going, you will, and just using behavior theory, that they'll stop because they're not getting anything from you, and it might take a while. Then there's all the reason to keep setting boundaries, but you just have to understand the nature of how you set that and how you so easily can get pulled into a fight that no matter how strong you feel, and I call this false power syndrome, where when you're angry and you're fighting, you feel strong. Well, that's dangerous. Then the boundaries will work. You just have to be patient. That's part of my thinking on that.
Well, so we're actually not that far apart. What I love
so we agree.
Yeah. Because I think what you're saying. So what's interesting is you just added a layer of it that I haven't spoken about that much, and it's like I'm nodding my head and I agree, but it's interesting. It hasn't entered my training as much, which is, on the one hand, it's like boundaries allow you to begin to think about and understand your needs, right? Which is
right.
Like your needs haven't even been on the list, so now it's like, oh, I want this. I can't have it, but I want it. So that's the beginning. So then you learn how to articulate, you can't speak to me that way, for instance, or you can't treat me that way. Or you can't send me 6,000 texts a day while I'm at work. And of course you're saying that and they're not going to listen. They're deaf to that. But you bring in this really interesting piece, which is if if you do the skill of boundary setting beautifully, but you do it with emotional angst, then you're feeding them. They're getting their supply. And so to your point, which I think is brilliant, when you're learning to set boundaries, at the same time, you want to be learning to not take the bait, right? To take a breath, to take a beat, to step back and to not do that same dance. And I think I have a dance I call the deflect and defend dance. And it's like, it's so hard when you're in these patterns, all of these various patterns that you and I talk about, to notice your part and detach from it. And yet the boundary requires you to step out of your victim mentality and begin building agency so that you believe you have agency. And that requires you to never expect that you can control the other person. The other thing, as you're speaking, is
Can I say something real quickly? I only briefly mentioned it, and I'm only going to briefly say it again. So if you guys want to know more about it, just go on Google, go on my website or YouTube, and that information will be at the end of this conversation. But the observe, don't absorb technique is the most essential technique skill set that I teach my clients. And essentially, I teach people through predictive awareness and education to understand what we just talked about. Don't wrestle with a pig, you'll get dirty. And beside the pig likes it. And I teach them the physical wrestling ring is anything you do or don't do. The emotional wrestling ring is when they get in your head. And I explain to them to temporarily, in a healthy way, dissociate, is to remove yourself emotionally and just watch the narcissist behave narcissistically and understand that should you let it into you emotionally, that's toxins. You get sick, which is the fight. And so don't absorb. And so if you understand observe, don't absorb, and all the stuff that we've talked about, you then have, it fits with what you just said. You have a technique that actually is hard to actually master, but once you get it, everyone loves it. That enables them to follow what you just said, is not to get pulled into it, because you now understand that fighting, the physical wrestling ring, you'll lose, you'll get dirty, you get muddy. Or if they get into your head, and that's why I've received so much positive feedback about it, because it's part of taking the fight up. So I just wanted to throw that in. Sorry for interrupting.
No, beautiful. No, that's so beautiful. And yes, so what I was going to say is I've spoken to a couple of other coaches about my boundary workshop, and the first thing that someone had said to me is, there's nothing collaborative about it. And
collaborative in what way?
Well, if you're setting a boundary with a healthy person, there's a different kind of dialogue, because there's a different kind of expectation, right? It's like, if I trained my people to go into these boundary conversations expecting that the other person would say, I hear you, I see you, that makes sense, I can respect that. Well, you're setting them up for failure. And so to your point, when you're working on boundaries in these dysfunctional relationships, it needs to be crystal clear in terms of what the boundary is and what you, the boundary setter, is going to do to uphold it. And that's where that, along with your observe, don't absorb, is where people begin to take back ownership of their mind and themselves, feel agency, feel empowered again after feeling so disempowered and so lost of self.
Yeah, I mean, I learned this stuff just because I got tired of hitting my head on the wall every time, because I felt like, even as an SLD, I stood up and didn't let the bullies push me around, but I still fell in love with narcissists. And I realized that by getting mad and defending myself, I was disempowering myself and I was making it easier for the narcissist to justify what they were doing. And that when I just was detached from the emotions, I could utilize anything I learned. Say, I sought your services, I would have been able to go use all these different skill sets that you teach, and watch which ones work and don't work. And then, and I'd have my mind. It would. Our minds are hijacked when we get angry because we don't know this. We're fighting the fight of the child we used to be, and that's another long discussion.
Yeah, that's a whole nother discussion. Once I had kind of understood what I was dealing with, and I stopped taking the bait. And this is a big thing. A lot of clients will be like, well, what do I say? Like you're in this banter, this debate, this back and forth. And, you started with this. And I say, I want you to get to the place where no matter what he or she does, your response is, of course.
Of course, that is a technique. It sounds easy just to say, of course. Of course requires all the knowledge that you teach and I teach, that basically predictive awareness. We set this boundary. They react this way. Of course. A quick story, and I'll give you a minute version of it. I had purposely ended the relationships with my family because of the level of toxicity. 5 years later, there was a family reunion, and I decided I'm going to go. And I was really excited. And my son, who was old enough to understand, and I shared a lot, said, Dad, why are you happy? I go, Ben, I didn't ever say I didn't want a family. I just said I don't want to be around people that hurt me. And I said, I am now ready to be around them and they can't hurt me. I said, I finally am at the point where anything they do, I'll brush it off and enjoy them, and I won't have to argue. I'll just walk away. And of course, he didn't understand. And I went there and I had a blast, and everyone did what they do. Of course, in my mind, of course, my sister did this, my brothers did this. And I walked away and I had a great time because I set my expectations. They did exactly what I thought they would do. I didn't have a reaction. So I say that story is that if you understand yourself well enough and you understand the narcissist well enough and how everything hasn't worked, and if you can just somehow detach and not get surprised, and that's the of course method in a nutshell.
Yeah, it really is. And it's beautiful. And so often my ex would say some mean and nasty things to me. And I was told this strategy from my mom when she was going through dementia. The counselor said, if you could be expecting and accepting of her worst day, then you'll never be frustrated and disappointed, and you'll often have an opportunity to be happy because she's having a good day. And I thought, oh my God, I'm using that with my clients. If you could be expecting and accepting.
Can I modify that?
Absolutely.
Accepting as in it's okay. If you can be expecting and accept that they are going to otherwise do something that's unfair and hurtful, which you don't have to get upset. Accept, like, it's okay. Like if they hurt you, if they're disrespectful and you do an SLD, I accept it. I accept all of you. But if that's okay, so it's okay. So we're on this.
No, it is. So accept. Okay, so this is a really great point. If I'm in resistance of how my narcissistic spouse shows up, then I'm going to be like, oh, he was just angry. She was just having a bad day.
Right.
And that's not the accepting we're talking about. We're saying accept that they have the behavior they have. And that's what they were saying with my mom. It's like, accept that she's not going to remember, that she's going to say the same thing 20 times. When you can expect and accept that her behavior is her behavior, you're not triggered by it anymore. And so my ex would come to me and say all these nasty things, and I'd be like, okay, let's go with that. I would say, I would have all these saying, okay, I hear your perspective. We could agree to disagree. Like all of these utterly neutral saying nothing statements. Right. So I wasn't like not responding, but I wasn't feeding the need.
So did your mother teach you that?
No, I learned that along the path.
Okay, whoever taught you that, kudos.
Oh, the accepting and expecting was a counselor. That was a social worker that we went to for my mom's dementia, and I love that saying. And I think it really hits home. Yeah. So we've touched on a lot of different things. How people end up with these personality types, why they're attracted to each other, why it then falls apart, the vital importance of the SLDD, understanding all of these steps, and then understanding what they can do about it, and then beginning to develop skills like boundaries where you're in full control, and being expecting and accepting throughout the entire thing.
Wow. That's really impressive that knowing you had that all planned out from the beginning. Excellent.
No, that's my secret sauce. I summarize well. Ross, I always enjoy chatting with you so much. You bring so much information and experience to the table. And I know that every time you join my audience that they benefit from it. So this has been a really fun conversation for me. And
without stealing your wonderful, wise, compassionate, and very lovely statements, the same. I so much enjoy our discussions. One, it's like talking to an old friend. Two is, let's say we did disagree. I don't think we disagreed on anything. It's fun. It's interesting because you're good. You're really good at what you do. And there's many different ways to get to the same point. It's just, you have talent and insight and sensitivity. You bring your own healing journey. And so I couldn't be more happy to know how successful we are and continue to be. And I would like for you to just for a minute tell my self-love recovery community a little bit about yourself and how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So my company is Journey Beyond Divorce. We have a team of coaches from coast to coast, and we support men and women through the before, during, and after stages of primarily high conflict divorce. We have a podcast, Journey Beyond Divorce. We have a website, Journey Beyond
You have
Divorce.
Yeah, I'm joking. I'm on it. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Here we are, and our most recent free offer, which I'll give you a link for, is a relationship health quiz where you can just answer these 10 questions, and you will get a really good sense of the health of your relationship, and we'll then share some information with you that guides you down the right path, given what your answers are.
And please, folks, everyone that is listening to this or watching this on my end, give her a call, shoot her an email. She's a real thing. She didn't become as successful as she is by accident.
Ross, I always enjoy these conversations. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and just, I always have fun. So thanks for that too.
Yeah.
Till next time.
Till next time.
Yeah, don't lick the grass, by the way.